Hey y'all, Moses here. Today I'm going to be talking about competitive PUBG or PUBG esports. This video is going to serve as an introduction to competitive PUBG, and I know there is a great deal of skepticism around PUBG as a viable esport, and that there are many misconceptions about this corner of the community. I'm going to address these concerns and do my best to explain why PUBG can be a viable competitive game and why you might enjoy it. I'm going to be avoiding the pitfalls of skepticism and eye-rolling, as I believe the general player population focuses too heavily on perceived issues with the game rather than the reality of how competitive PUBG has evolved. I'm going to do my best to make this a resource to introduce prospective fans or to at least alleviate some of the misconceptions about the game. Competitive PUBG is still extremely new and has only started to solidify since the beginning of the year, when unified formats and settings began to be adopted by the various online tournaments. This wasn't always the case. When online tournaments began to form, TPP was still the only FOV setting, and the amount of professional organizations involved in PUBG was near to none. After the transition into FPP, the meta began to shift, and the top teams in TPP began to either adapt or fall off completely. I got into PUBG esports right as this transition began, in early August. It wasn't until the announcement of IEM Oakland in 2017 that organizations began to enter the PUBG scene en masse. There was a bit of a gold rush, with organizations picking up the best teams in the online tournament environment. Oakland set the stage for the next phase of the evolution of PUBG esports and served as a great lesson as to what still needed to be changed for the competitive scene. The recent Star Ladder tournament has proven to be the pinnacle of those changes and the overall evolution of the competitive scene, but is still only an early indicator of where things could potentially go. I'm going to expand on many of these concepts and the things I've mentioned, but that is essentially where we are now, with the next major tournament at PGL in Romania only a few weeks away. There are many major differences between competitive PUBG and the way it is set up and the standard public play settings. 1. There is no red zone. 2. AR spawns are generally set to 1.5 times their normal spawn rate. And 3. The circle settings are adjusted to reduce RNG and to allow for endgame firefights. To summarize, the AR spawns are increased to alleviate early game RNG and to allow teams to be adequately equipped for the mid and end game when looting becomes very difficult. The circle settings have been shifted to reduce the initial size of the first 2 play zones, but make the last few play zones slightly larger with slower moving circles. This gives time and space for teams to fight and move in critical stages of the game, but still makes the circle a threat. It paces the game more evenly, and this change has been universally adopted by nearly all organizers and has even been proposed to be adopted into the public client. For a full list of the circle settings, check the description of this video. One of the most controversial topics in the competitive community is map selection. Erangel has been used in most online tournaments and LANs because there has been a vocal portion of the player base that believes Miramar isn't competitively viable. Miramar does have its issues, but over the last few months the sentiment has begun to shift, and Miramar has begun to see use in tournaments and will be featured at PGL. The current format also sees 16 competing teams. With the circle, AR, and map settings, 16 teams seems to be the best fit to allow for strategic rotations, accessible loot, and to reduce RNG of late game engagements. Essentially, RNG has been reduced across many fronts and allows strategy to be the primary focus. We'll get into the meta and strategy shortly. Now that I've covered the basics, it's time to talk about the competitors. In competitive PUBG, consistency is the primary factor for success. Regardless of how much effort that has gone into reducing RNG, circle luck can still be a deciding factor in who wins a given round. While circle RNG is what makes the game both exciting and frustrating, there are many teams that have established histories of success regardless of what the game throws at them. I'm going to give a brief power ranking of teams based on offline and online tournament performance, and then talk a bit about each one. I'll be going into more depth on teams and players in future videos. The pound-for-pound heavyweight champion of PUBG is Faze Clan. Formerly Gorilla Core, the roster of Haxetti, Fuzzface, Mixie, and Jempty have the longest and most consistent pedigree of success. After dominating in online tournaments as Gorilla Core, Faze Clan picked them up ahead of IEM Oakland. Fuzzface was added to the team from Kinkwin just before the tournament, and they placed 4th behind Ghost Gaming, Tempo Storm, and the overall winners Against All Authority, who are now Team Vitality. After Oakland, their online success continued. They were then invited to Korea along with Optic and Vitality to compete against Koreans in a third-person perspective tournament. Fuzzface won the solo portion, and Faze finished 2nd overall behind OG and Entis in the squad final. At IEM Katowice, it was another 4th place finish, and then finally at Star Ladder in Kiev, Faze was able to secure their first land victory. Since Kiev, Faze has rattled off win after win online and are looking to continue their success in Bucharest at PGL. After Faze, the remaining members of the top 5 becomes a bit difficult to determine. For the purposes of this video and based on tournament performance both online and offline, the next 4 teams in arguable order are Team Vitality, Cloud9, Team Liquid, and Avangar. At this stage, power rankings can shift from week to week, but many teams are seeking to gain some level of consistency, and powerful rosters are forming to try to displace Faze as the best team in the world. Team Liquid has the best chance, but as a new roster that is very talented, they are still working to improve their consistency. Unlike other esports, star players in PUBG have a few different forms. In some teams, there are defined roles similar to games like CSGO, where some players play a support role, some take on the duties of IGL, and others are pure fraggers. Competitive PUBG is about team effort, and with that in mind, Yempty and Mixion Faze are some of the best fraggers in the game, whereas Fuzzface and Haxetti execute strategy and support masterfully. Outside of Faze, Zampa from Tempo Storm is one of, if not the best fraggers in North America, where Jeems on Team Liquid secured the most overall kills at Star Ladder. Generally, the performance of players rises and falls with the performance of their teams. Again, I'll be covering the teams more elaborately in coming videos. Now it's time to talk about what makes competitive PUBG compelling. The base game played by the general population can be played in multiple ways. You can play aggressively or passively, but strategy and decision making are at the core of each game. The same can be said for competitive PUBG, where execution of strategy throughout the game is one of the primary conditions to securing a victory. Like public games, I prefer to segment the game into 3 stages: the early game, the mid game, and the end game. In the early game, teams drop in preferred looting locations and tend to avoid early game fights if possible. Point systems favor placement and provide kill bonuses, but early game fighting when teams are at their weakest generally benefit no one. Another key to a successful early game is the collection of vehicles, which are vital during rotations, to the point where many early game deaths are due to contested vehicle drops. After the first circle reveals itself, the first rotation begins. During rotations is where teams are at their weakest, as vehicles can be easily destroyed when a squad opens fire on it. The first rotation will see teams either seeking a compound in the center of the circle or opting to arrive late for a prolonged loot phase. Holding a center compound is ideal because they provide safety and a vantage point to attack rotating teams. Centering has proven to be so popular that the center of zones becomes densely packed with teams, which can lead to chaotic rotations later in the game. Due to this, the centering strategy has relaxed recently, with some teams opting for the edge. The mid-game will see skirmishing between teams who are rotating and others defending their cover. After the 5th phase begins, rotations in vehicles becomes very dangerous, and teams will often begin to fight more seriously for position. In my estimation, after the 5th phase is when the endgame begins. The key to a successful endgame generally hinges on the ability of competing teams to keep their squad nearest to full strength as possible. After that, it's a matter of reacting to the circle, taking and finishing team fights, and then individual skill takes over until the game is decided. This is why match days consist of up to 5 games, and why recent tournaments have begun to feature multiple match days, so that the most consistent teams are the ones rewarded. In conclusion, PUBG as an esport is still in its early days, but is growing from month to month. PUBG has its own issues to sort out, but looking beyond the individual issues that arise, the game has improved massively overall from early access and will likely continue to do so. Personally, I look beyond PUBG and focus more on the Battle Royale genre as an esports product. Skills in this game will transfer to future Battle Royale titles, so for now I think it's good to get in during the early days and as a community help guide its future. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it was enlightening or educational to you. If you're interested in PUBG esports, I cast the game. There are several leagues ongoing on a week-to-week basis, and the upcoming PGL tournament will serve to be another interesting chapter of PUBG esports. So leave a comment down below if you're interested in PUBG esports, or if you want me to cover any specific teams, or if you're just generally interested and want to talk about it as a concept or whatever. I know there's going to be a lot of backlash to the idea, so I don't mind if you critique the idea based on the current state of the game, which is fine. I understand where you're coming from, but keep in mind that there's lots going on to improve the game on a day-to-day basis, so hopefully you keep that in mind as well. So anyway, like the video if you liked it. There will be more PUBG esports related content coming in the future. So until next time, I'll see you out there.